to yesterday a little bit. Yes, there are the 3 steps to writing your equations, but truly, the very first step is to start establishing your domain. So what I mean by that is, before you start solving this parameter for t, we did this one?
Yes.
Okay, so before we start solving this parameter for t, you want to look at your 2 functions to see if you have a red light. Okay, so in this function, do we have a red light for this x parameter? A red light would be a square root or dividing by a variable. So we don't have that here. What about in our y parameter? Do we have a red light? No. So we're starting off with a domain of all real numbers. Okay, so now that we have, and that's going to come into play later. So there's a reason why I'm having you start with that. Okay, you always want to start by establishing the domain of your parameters. So right now we don't have any restrictions. Our domain is all real numbers. So now let's start writing our equation. Go ahead, take your first equation.
Sorry, what were the red lights again?
The 2 red lights are a square root and dividing by a variable.
Yeah.
So you can divide by a number. So you can have t divided by 3, but you can't have 3 divided by t. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and solve this for t. So that's pretty easy. 1-step equation. How would you solve that for t? You only have to do one thing, and that's just divide by -3. So let's do that. So you're left with x over -3 equals t. So now we're going to take that and substitute that in your y parameter. So when I substitute that in, it would be y equals, so y equals t squared plus 2. And I'm putting that x over -3 inside. And let's simplify that. What is x over -3 squared? You just square them both. Square numerator, square denominator. So what's x squared? X squared. And what's -3 squared? 9. So your equation would be y equals x squared over 9 plus 2. So we started off without a red light. Did I end with a red light? No. So my domain is still all real numbers. All right, so because I know I'm going to need to erase this, I'm going to leave that up for a couple seconds before I take it off to do the next question. All right, we all have that down? Okay, let's look at our next question. We're only going to do a few questions today, just 3. Because I don't want to hit the word problems until Tuesday, so. All right, so now let's look at, oops, sorry, I skipped one. Okay, so now let's look at this one here. So let's clear this out. All right, so when I'm looking here, do I start with a red light? I have t squared minus 5. Does that have a red light? All right, 4 times t, is that a red light? All right, so we start off good. So now let's start writing our Cartesian equation. So we're going to take that x. Go ahead and solve that for t.
So do you have to solve for x every time, or could you solve for y and then put that into x?
We could, but generally the easier, yeah, you could do either way.
Okay.
So we don't always have to start with the y, with the x. We can also start with y. Okay, so 2 steps. We're going to add 5, take the square root. So when you add the 5 to x and take the square root, you get x plus 5 equals t squared. So t is going to equal the square root of x plus 5. Who agrees with that? All right, now there's something important, though, that we have to put in front. Going back to yesterday, what did we put in front of our square root? Yeah, let's put that plus minus in front. Because we don't want to restrict our domain. It's plus and minus, so we want the whole curve, even the part that's going to go underneath the x-axis. So now let's take that and put it for t. So y equals 4. And now inside of that parentheses, I have my plus minus square root of x plus 5. So at the end, I did end with a red light. So my domain is not going to be all real numbers because I have a square root. When you take the square root of a number, you cannot take a square root of a negative. The square root of a negative is imaginary. So the lowest number you can take the square root of is 0. 0 or anything greater than 0. So my domain, when we do our domain, that x plus 5 has to be greater than or equal to 0. So let's solve that for x. So we subtract the 5 from both sides. So that gives us x is greater than or equal to negative 5. So when I write my domain in interval notation, my domain is negative 5 to infinity. Negative 5 gets a bracket because it can equal negative 5. Because if you put a negative 5 right here, negative 5 plus 5 is 0. That's the lowest we can go. So we can actually use negative 5, which is why we put a hard bracket to print to infinity. So this is our answer. So the next one is pretty complicated, which is why I wanted us to. It's not complicated. The only thing that's complicated is the domain of the next one. So, because we got a lot happening in that one. All right, any questions about, I don't know, I don't think I numbered these, but this next question. All right, so we're going to end with this next one here, and then you'll have the rest of the class period to start working on your homework. Let me go ahead and take this one off for today. And on Monday, I'm going to do that one and a couple more. All right, so let's look at these two because both of these start with restrictions, right? We have both red lights. Before we even start trying to write our new equation, they both have a red light. This first one, the x parameter, has a square root. So we automatically, because of this one, my domain, because of that t plus 4, that has to be greater than or equal to 0, which means that t has to be greater than or equal to negative 4. So I'm going to kind of put that to the side. So because of that first parameter, I'm already starting off with nothing less than negative 4. All right. The second one is being divided by t, which means I also know that t cannot equal 0. So I'm going to put those to the side. So no matter what equation I come up with in the end, I already have 2 domain restrictions. Okay. So now I'm going to leave those to the side, and now let's start writing our equation. Take your x parameter and solve that for t. So if I have x equals the square root of t plus 4, I'm gonna write it on the side, actually. Oops. So I have x equals the square root of t plus 4. How do I solve that? What's the first thing I need to do? Square both sides to get rid of the square root. So when you do that, you get x squared equals t plus 4. And then what do I need to do? Subtract the 4 on both sides. So x squared minus 4 equals t. And now we're going to take that, I'm going to take this and put it here. So my equation is going to be y equals, and it's 1 over x squared minus 4. So this is my final equation. But when I look at that, I have a brand new red light that I need to consider. So let's figure out, because that's x squared minus 4 in my denominator, we have to remember that that cannot equal 0. So I'm going to take that x squared minus 4, that cannot equal 0. So let's go ahead and solve that. That means that there's 2 numbers that I also have to exclude. 2 more numbers. So I'm going to add the 4. X squared cannot equal 4. Now, when you take the square root of 4, what are your 2 answers? So x cannot equal plus and minus 2. All right. So let's go ahead and put all of these red lights on the number line. So when I make my little number line here, so I got a negative 4 that I need to plot. And then I have the 0. And then I have negative 2. And I have positive 2. There's a lot of numbers I need to put on my number line. So I have the negative 4 from here, the 0, the positive 2, and the negative 2. Can I use negative 4 though?
Yes.
So I can put a closed circle on negative 4. The other 3, because they're in the denominator, are all open circles. So this is a pretty complicated domain that we have here. So first of all, I can't go past negative 4. So the first piece of my domain is this piece. So my domain, I'm going to start writing it out. I have a hard bracket on negative 4. And then I can only go to negative 2 and I have to stop. Negative 2 gets a parentheses. That's my first interval. Union. Then I get to my second interval, which is the really little, short little drive right here. And that's between negative 2 and 0. Then I gotta stop again. And I have a little b short drive right here. And that's between 0 and 2. Oops, I gotta push my page. Okay, there we go. Sorry. I have another union. And then I finally get to the end. And I could go all the way off to infinity. And that would be from 2 to infinity. So it's a pretty long domain statement. That's my domain. And this was my function. Okay, any questions about that? All right, go ahead, take out your homework 16 and start working on that. On Monday, we're going to continue doing equations and practicing domains. I'm probably going to hand out like a half sheet with a couple extra questions that we'll do, maybe 2 or 3. And then Tuesday, we'll start working on the equation component of chapter 10.